Welcome back to the fourth video out of four, in which I'll be reviewing basic punctuation functions with you. In the first video, I did a general introduction to why punctuation is important and why it's worth taking some time to do a little review. The second video focused on the 5 basic uses of commas and applied each of those rules. The third video addressed semicolons and the 2 ways that you're most likely to use those. The fourth video, is going to focus on the one way to use a colon that most people need to know, and we'll toss in dashes as an added bonus. Now, as we get ready to do this, I want to warn you ahead of time. The dash information is pretty much optional, right? I don't think that's ever appeared on a writing SOL. I don't think that's very common. Most people probably shouldn't use dashes, if we're being honest, because people get what I call dash happy. Once you start throwing dashes in, you just sort of put them anywhere. You start thinking like, well, I don't really need to know how to use the other punctuation. I can just put a dash anywhere I'm not sure of. And that kind of defeats the purpose of that punctuation mark, but you would have the option. So everyone needs to know Rule 8, how to use a colon. Whether or not you know how to use a dash is a little bit up to you. I think it's a great tool to have. It creates some good stylistic options. But it's not something that, say, a below average writer really wants to start using initially, just because there's a tendency to abuse it, to overuse it, which then creates other problems, starts to look sloppy. Dashes do appear on the SAT writing portion of the test. So if you're doing a little test prep, you want to make sure that you take a look at this and understand the basic functions. But within your own writing, I think that, yes, a dash is an important thing to use. I just don't want you to overdo it. I think there's some serious risk there. So let's go back and pull up our slides. And here we go. So there's only really one way to use a colon that most people need to know, and that is at the end of a complete sentence, and you then want to add on explanation, clarification, or example. The basic rule here is that I can't say anything new after a colon. All I can do is add detail to an idea that I brought up earlier in the sentence. So I can't go from foods I like to foods I dislike. That would be, I need a semicolon or a comma or a period, and I cannot use this. However, if I say something in general about foods that I like, I could, instead of just stopping the sentence, putting a period, I could put a colon and then list some of my favorite foods, or provide a quick clarification of what I'm really talking about when I mean favorite, something like that. Okay, so a colon comes where you could have put a period, you could have ended the sentence, and then everything you say after it is explanation, clarification, or example. It's also important to make sure that that information is not a natural fit on the end of the sentence. Like if the information just sort of all flows right together, don't put in a colon. This is for when the sentence came to a natural end, and now you want to attach that extra information. So go ahead and look at the first sample. You will learn the following skills, period. I could be done. But in this case, when I say following skills, I make it pretty clear that I'm about to go ahead and list them. They're going to be following right here. So I put the colon, and then I can list them out. In the second sample, I say, I like a few classes. Yeah, I could just be done. I like a few classes. At this point, not everyone's expecting me to say what all those classes are, but I could say I like a few classes. The colon tells an informed reader, let me clarify. Let me tell you what I'm talking about here. So now I say I like a few classes, English, biology, and guitar. Okay, now in both of those cases, I'm listing examples, which is the most common use of a colon. The most common thing people do if they use a colon correctly is they write a sentence, and then they attach a list of examples, ideas, whatever it may be, that relate back to information from before. That's our goal here. The third sample does something a little bit different, but is still technically fine. I have 2 complete sentences, except the second sentence is only there to clarify or explain something from the first. Now, when I first see a sentence like this, where I go, well, I've got 2 sentences around together, my first thought is that's a semicolon. And usually I'm going to want the semicolon. But what a colon does is it says, okay, I have a complete sentence. Now let me tell you more about it. If you have a second sentence there, but it's only there to clarify or explain something in the first part, the colon is the appropriate punctuation mark, because what that does is it tells the reader, hey, let me tell you more about that. Okay. Again, those of you who've had me in class, I do a little sort of walk thing, and you say, I have a complete sentence, period. I have a complete sentence, period, right? The semicolon from the previous video is I have a complete sentence, yield sign, I have a complete sentence, period. I put the yield sign where I could have put the stop sign. What a colon does is it says, I have a complete sentence, colon, and then it faces backwards and you say, let me tell you more about that stuff I just said, period, and then I continue on with a new idea. It means let's go into more detail about what we just said. So in that last sentence, last sample sentence, Mr. Tibbens teaches punctuation well. His simplified rules help students. I could put a period there. I could put a semicolon there. But by putting the colon, I'm telling you that the reason that Mr. Tibbens teaches these things well is really about the rules. That says, by clarifying, I'm not giving the teacher the credit. I'm giving the simplified rules the credit. Because there's only 8, they're pretty clear, it's straightforward. This is what helps students the most. Okay, by putting the colon, I say, let me explain what I just said. And now I'm showing you the real important thing there is that the rules are what helps teach the punctuation well. Okay, so you can't have a complete sentence on both sides, or you can't have a sentence, colon, and then a phrase, though the most common application is the first 2 samples where you list them. Now, one special note about the colon, you cannot use a colon along with phrases like, for example, such as, to clarify, like, namely, those kinds of things. They do the same job as a colon. So if I say, I like several classes, comma, for example, and then I list them, that's fine, comma, for example. Those phrases don't always, but especially for example and such as, usually require a comma before them because we're back to doing rule 2. I'm sort of giving an interruption in my idea to add optional information. Interrupt and give that optional information to clarify. If I want to remove the phrase comma, for example, comma, such as, or to clarify, like, etc., I have a complete sentence, and now I want to give you those extra examples of clarification. If I don't use these phrases, I pull them out, I put in the colon. That's it. Okay, just be careful. You should not do both. There are also some formatting things you can do with a colon when you write a formal business letter. If you are listing ingredients, if you're doing, again, some science writing, technical writing, you'll do some different stuff. But in terms of your basic, just regular prose, sentence, and paragraphs, this is it. That's the only way to use a colon you need to know. Yep, that's it. Now, I do want to do a little something extra here, and I'll move myself out of the way, or try to. What a dash does is just rule 2, the interruption rule, or rule 8, the colon rule, but it does it with extra emphasis. I want you to imagine for rule 2, where I have a sentence going along, but I want to interrupt and add some extra information that was optional. Imagine instead of using commas, I really want that idea to be set apart. I really want to emphasize how important that is. Okay, in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use dashes on both sides of my interruption. The dash creates that emphasis because, again, it, like rule 7, the semicolons on the list, it's about helping the reader's eyes. A dash creates physical space between the words, and therefore it makes that interruption stand apart, makes it sort of stick out on its own. Now, it is important to remember that a dash is twice as wide as a hyphen. So if you're typing, space, and you hit the hyphen, or like the minus sign, you need to have a space again after it, and you'd keep typing. If you do that in Microsoft Word, it will automatically double the width. If you're using Google Docs, it does not automatically format. So what you need to do is you'll be typing a word, you hit space, hyphen, hyphen, or minus sign, space, and you go to the next word. You must have spaces on both sides of a dash. Okay, if not, sometimes people will misinterpret. They'll think it's a hyphen where you're trying to attach 2 words like well written, well hyphen written, trying to make this combination, right? So a dash is not the same thing as a hyphen. It's twice as wide. And you want to make sure you understand the formatting of whatever word processing software you're using. The other one here, then, rule 8, is what we just went over with colons. Just imagine that a dash in that case mostly functions like a colon and an exclamation point put together. So I'll go ahead and move me back up here and go ahead and look at rule 2. Instead of using commas around the interruptions, you can use the dashes. So the sample, Mr. Tibbens, the greatest teacher of all time, knows punctuation rules. Why, thank you for saying so. Now, the reason we put the dashes there is to really emphasize how important that interruption is. Remember it, right? If I put the commas, it means the same thing. I just haven't created the physical space. And as a result, I haven't emphasized the interruption. Now, the reason we don't want to abuse it is because if we throw dashes around all the time, they lose their power. Okay, you start seeing lots of little gaps in the page. We start seeing all of these open spaces. And as a result, it doesn't do the job. It just starts to blend in. It doesn't look like anything fancy. Rule 8, same thing. Imagine rule 8, look at the sample sentence. I could have put a colon there. Be sure to bring the best candy in the world. I could put a colon and then clarify Reese's peanut butter eggs. They're wonderful. But I really want to make sure that that sample is set apart. I want you to understand that it's important that we really understand exactly what we're talking about. So I use the dash. Now, the reason we don't want to get dash happy is the same reason that we don't want to throw around a lot of bad words. Okay, bad words, curse words. Why are they bad? You come up with a million reasons, but the reality is bad words are actually really good. They're really good because they have power. We've agreed as a culture, we've agreed that these are somehow taboo, that these are words we should avoid. So if you make the choice to use one, everyone's supposed to sort of be startled by it. We're supposed to know that that was a big deal. If you've ever heard someone say, well, you shouldn't swear too much because people think you have a small vocabulary. Yeah, maybe that's true. I don't know. Maybe we think that. Or we might think you're lazy, okay? Or you have a bad sense of your surroundings. All of that might be true. The real reason not to use too many bad words too often is because if you do, they lose their power. If you say the F word every third sentence, all right, well, after the initial shock, everyone just forgets about it. Now, what do you say when you're really upset, when you're really angry, when you really need to get someone's attention? You don't have that word anymore because that word coming out of your mouth doesn't mean anything, right? Bad words are good because they have power. So if we only use them on the occasion where I really need that emphasis, I really need that intense emotion, well, now I have a word there to do the job. I want you to think about a dash being the same kind of thing. I only use it when I really need that emphasis so that when it's there, so that when I create that space within a sentence, the reader's eyes jump to it and they know this is something important. If I start getting dash happy, I throw them around too much, then what happens is those spaces pop up all over the page. People start to ignore them. It loses its power. Okay. Dashes should be used relatively rarely. They do appear on the SAT. I do not believe they appear or they don't appear often on the writing SOL. This is something that we should be aware of, and it's a tool that we want to have, but it's one that we want to use relatively rarely. Okay. Now, that's it. In 8 simple rules, throw in a ninth if you like to think about dashes. In 8 simple rules, that's all the punctuation you need basically for your entire life. Okay. Obviously formatting letters, dates, city, state, that's a little bit different. But if we're being honest, most people know those things. That isn't too tricky. These are the 8 rules you need to punctuate better than pretty much all the people you know, punctuate better than most of your teachers do. Um, and to make yourself a functional and at least at a minimum adequate writer, both for academic and professional purposes. Okay. This is a little oversimplifying. So for those of you who are not fully grasping this, I want you to skip this part. Just skip ahead a minute in the video, skip this slide when you're going through the notes. But for those of you who are mostly grasping these concepts, then here's like a little transitive property sort of game, a little way to play with this, to think about the relationships between the punctuation. Because remember, relationships between punctuation marks are important because the job of punctuation marks is to indicate the relationships between ideas in the paper or on the page. So a comma kind of does the same thing as an and. Obviously, that's not always true, but it does create this sense that things are coming together, or in some cases, say with interruptions, things are staying apart. It also works really nicely for rules 3 and 4, etc. Comma fanboys go where you could have put a period. I'd have 2 complete sentences, but I want to put them together. I can do the comma fanboys. Well, interestingly, that's exactly what a semicolon does. I just don't need the words to help it out. So a semicolon can do the same job as comma fanboys where I don't need that conjunction. That means that a semicolon goes where a period does. Remember, yield sign versus stop sign. I use a colon where I could have said comma, for example, comma such as, or something like that to add on those examples or clarification. I drop the phrase, I put in the colon. And then I want you to think about the dash as being like the colon with an exclamation point. Remember, it can also do rule 2, the interruption, and it has that same sort of feature of being like a comma with an exclamation point. You're going to do it for emphasis. That's it. Okay. That's all you really need. Now, make sure you go back and log into LCPS Go, click on the no red ink icon, and do some of the colon practice. If you have questions about how to use colons or semicolons or commas or about any of the punctuation information that I have just explained to you, make sure that you email your English teacher with specific questions. When possible, try to use the language that we've just discussed, use the rules, use the numbers, or if you're confused about an issue within No Red Ink, make sure that you copy the sentence into the email. Okay, make sure you do a little copy paste or a screenshot. That way, your teacher knows exactly what you're asking about. That's it. So for this week, all we're doing in English 11 is a quick review of punctuation. Remember that after spring break, we'll be starting into some new learning, some new content. We'll address some new stuff. And depending on what the upper administration and school board decide, grades may be beginning at that point. And most of the teachers have indicated that they have at least some interest in doing a summative assessment with the punctuation. So make sure you do the review, make sure you ask questions where you got them. And in the event that a quiz pops up, you'll be fully prepared, nothing to worry about. More importantly, you should be a better writer and you should get what you want more often because your reader is going to better understand what you have to say. I hope you have found these videos to be helpful. And again, if you have questions, make sure that you reach out and ask. All right, everybody, enjoy the time off. Stay safe, stay home, and email us if you have any questions or concerns.